Thank you, Mrs. Chairwoman. I think I should start by introducing myself. Shall I? Yes. Okay, my name is Amel Azzouz. I am now Secretary of State in charge of international cooperation. Before that, that means a year ago, I used to be a member of the National Constituent Assembly. Precisely, I used to work in one of the most important commissions, that of the preamble and the basic principles and the amendment of the Constitution. And originally, I used to teach British literature. I would like to start, first of all, by thanking the organizers of this forum. I have to mention here the UGTT and the University of Carthage. I would like also to thank Democracy International, or Démocratie Internationale, if you want it in the French way. I'd like also to thank Swiss Info. Thank you also to Amr Uber and to Bruno Kaufmann for allowing me this occasion to address such a distinguished audience. I am supposed here to address a question which I have addressed many times. However, I do not like really to be cornered in just talking about women. I've been a deputy, supposed of talking about the citizen, men and women, everybody. I talked about democracy. I talked about Islam and democracy. I talked about radicalism, extremism. I talked about investment recently. This is a new helmet, if you want. I talked about a large variety of things, about secularism, if you want, the civil state. Today, because I'm asked to go back to women's question and women's issue and women's participation and contribution to democracy, that's a very important question. So I'm really happy to talk about this today. Few months ago, I was invited in a conference organized by Yale University on Tunisian exceptionalism. And the question was, can we really talk of a Tunisian exceptionalism? And I answered yes, there is a Tunisian exceptionalism. I mentioned factors or elements which made this exceptionalism. I mentioned society itself, a homogeneous society. I mentioned the role of the army, a neutral, uninvolved army. I mentioned the civil society and the role of the civil society, despite few imperfections. A civil society which is really solid and able to build opinion. That's another element which made also Tunisian exceptionalism. I mentioned the political society, which initiated dialogue long before revolution, and I mentioned also women. I mentioned women. Women is another factor in Tunisia which made this exceptionalism. I have divided my speech into three major parts. The first part, very briefly, I'll talk a little bit about the pre-revolution role, because I do believe that revolutions are not just a jump in history. We do not just jump in history. There are accumulations. And women, along with men, of course, they built accumulations during times of dictatorship, which finally reached revolution, the 2014, January 2000. I do admit that young people played a great role in this, but I do believe also that there are generations which contributed along years in building this, if you want, will towards a change. In the pre-revolution era, women's contribution contributed to the fight against dictatorship and to the revolution. Women showed equal resistance and sacrifice as men. I mean, when I say dictatorship, men and women were victims of dictatorship. Even more, women were doubly victimized. doubly victimized. I'll show afterwards how, in what way women were doubly victimized. So she has her share of in resisting dictatorship. Women were, or the woman was the martyr's mother, yes, the martyr's sister, yes, the martyr's daughter, yes, but she herself was a martyr. She was the detainee's wife, the detainee's mother, the detainee's daughter, but she herself was a detainee. She gave everything precious for the sake of the ultimate cause. I'm talking here, maybe there is nothing as convincing or as touching as someone's personal story, a personal story, is in what way we believed in it's true we militated or we fought within my party, which was Nahda at that time, but the ultimate goal was freedom for us and for the others. Freedom for us and for the, which was a slogan that we rose at that time. Freedom in this country. Women got engaged in resistance through involvement in student trade unions, in universities. She fought as, she got involved, if you want, or engaged in workers' trade unions and in forbidden opposition parties. She went out in demonstrations. However, her participation within NGOs and civil society was very limited because at that time there were neither real opposition parties, I mean political parties, nor real civil society. So she was persecuted, she was arrested, she was tortured and even raped. In short, she was denied her right. I would like to reduce all of this in one word. She, along with men, was denied the right for citizenship. I myself, at that time, I was seeking for a meaning, for a significance, for what to be, to belong, what the meaning of belonging to the land where there is no citizenship, no dignity. There is no meaning for belonging here. The second part is, I entitled this, is how she helped. Women helped sparkling the 14th of January revolution and instituting the new republic. The role she played in political life following the revolution was very important. There was a real, if you want, turning point, and this is not only for women, men and women at the level of political life. We used to belong to political parties, clandestine, illegal, if you can call them, but really how to practice politics, how to be, if you want, engaged, involved in political process that was really felt after the revolution. So the role women played in political life following the revolution was exceptionally important. I would like to give just few instances of such involvement. Number one, during the elections. The role women played in elections is very important. I myself, I was following from a close, in a very close way. The way women behave during electoral campaign is very, very typical and is very different from men. When women believe in a cause, there is no one else. I think, I do believe in this. When a woman has a cause, she's able to fight in a way which is incomparable to men. I dare say that. I dare say that. And this is what she showed during those moments, rare moments, which we have never felt during the electoral campaigns. I'm talking of 2011. Because I was not a candidate during the last elections of 2014. So in civil society, immediately thousands, there was a mushrooming of NGOs, of civil society, and a majority of them led and by women, or even also where women adhered and established. They were members establishing. So the women were exceptionally active at the establishment of civil society organizations at the NCA, National Constituent Assembly. And thanks to male-female parity, we had a new, despite everything that could be said around the National Constituent Assembly, because I do put everything within its context of a transition. There was something effervescent which took place in Tunisia. And you cannot judge anything without taking into consideration all that context. So the NCA, 30% women, 30% of the members were women. The deputy speaker was a woman. This is the first position held by a woman in the Arab world, the first position. Women were president of constitutional, legislative, and special commissions. They were the most committed in their, when I say the most committed, it means at the level of attendance, okay? Meticulous in their work, in the discussions, in the debate, and during plenaries also, and in the regions, in their regions, although they were supposed to be deputies in a national constituent assemblies, supposed to prepare and to draft the constitution. But despite of that, because of the high expectations of people, we did found them in their constituencies, trying to respond as much as possible to people's needs and people's demands and people's expectations, which were exceptionally high, in a very rare way. However, there was, because there is always a however in the speech, however, here, there was a humble presence, the presence of women at the level of government, and all the governments succeeding after the revolution, very humble representation. No presence in the central and regional leading offices of the trade unions. In the UGTT, central board, no women at all. 86, I'd like to give you just one telling example. 86% of workers in textile sector are women, but only 10% of them are members of the UGTT in that sector. All they are 86%. Another, now, a third, if you want, title is now. What about now? A slightly more important representation in the government. There is a slightly more important representation in the government, and something new. Women who are in power now in the government are no more in charge of the Ministry of Women, because typically a woman should hold the Ministry of Women. Now we have one in culture, Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of International Cooperation, in the finance, in the, what else? Culture? And in tourism as well. So these are, if you want, posts and positions which have always been monopolized and reserved to men alone. I do consider this a change towards the positive. Now there is also 32% of deputies. 32% of deputies are women. And recently, and that is something really very positive, the UGTT in the last Congress they had, or the last meeting they had in Tozer, they opted for something very important. They were aware suddenly that it's not normal not to have women leaders in trade unions, so they opted for quotas, for a given quota for women's representation in elected assemblies of trade unions. Challenges, I finish with challenges and perspectives. There are real challenges, despite, although I've been looking at I always look at the half full, if you want, side of the glass, but still, there are real challenges facing involvement of women in public life, in a genuine participation in building democracy. That is what matters for you here today. Women today are overburdened. Let me be clear. They are overburdened by what? They have jobs. They work outside. They do housework. They look after children, and they are at the same time very active in the public sphere. So how can you? This is a superwoman. Superwomen. No one can imagine something like that. So especially, we have to consider this, especially when we do look at men's almost total resignation of the family. Men are resigned. They are not here, okay? They are not here. So given this overburden, given this tearing, if you want, of women, women often choose to abandon political life, to abandon the public life, if you want, the syndical activities, so as what? So as to preserve her job, so as to preserve her family and her kids. So this is why today we do not have real involvement of women in such a sphere. Another challenge, which is really worthy being taken into consideration, and that concerns men particularly here, is that women are still, and I'm not talking of Tunisia alone here, I'm talking of women all over the world, they are still underestimated. They are still mistrusted. A woman in a decision-making position is still looked at with a lot of skepticism. Is she really able? Is she really made for great missions, for great jobs? That's a big question, really. No. So women are not yet fit. This is what they say. This is what they believe. They do believe, but not say, unfortunately, okay, men here, and this is the double standard, if you can. Women are not yet fit for great missions. All the parties, the political parties, they do say, we are for women's emancipations, we have women in our assemblies, we etc. But in reality, they do not dare to face a very crucial question, which is, do you really trust women in decision-making position? So this could be understood. I do, I'm realistic. I am a realistic woman, and life has taught me how to be realistic. So this could be understood given women's long exclusion. She has been long excluded for a long time from society and from culture and from everything, from political life. And this is due also to her own resignation, maybe, from public life. But this is not accepted when it becomes a mentality or a culture. I'm afraid this starts to be a culture. Legislation, to finish, can do a lot. Legislation can change. And in Tunisia, we have started with legislation, which is very important. Legislation can change, but legislation alone is not enough, What we need, I'd like to give you, before I finish, just one example too, which is really very telling. Immediately when we finished the ratification of the constitution, where everybody knows in Tunisia and abroad the role of women in that constitution, in what way they were committed, either within the assembly or outside the assembly, in NGOs. Women were there all the time. So, but the moment, the day the constitution was ratified, I was following all the channels, all of them, local and foreign. No one invited the women to discuss the constitution. No one. No channel at all. So just to tell you to what extent how people look at women. So to conclude here, I said legislation is not enough. We need to work on how to establish a mentality, a culture, how to work on education itself. Education is a key word, is a magic word. So the establishment and the consolidation of the culture of democracy passes by appropriate legislation. That's number one. Number two, by spreading the spreading of a certain consciousness conveyed by all individuals. Once the important role women can play also a very important role in the spreading of this culture of democracy. Today, just to finish, I'm sorry, Madam the Chairwoman, I'd like to remind you that today is the 15th of May, which is the International Day for what? Of the family. And when I say family, it's not only a woman's job, it's a man's job. And if you want a happy family, you need to reconsider women's role in society, either within the private sphere and the public sphere. Thank you very much for your attention.